Cosmic here. Welcome to the channel and happy release day for the Demon Slayer main set. Is what I'd love to be saying if I had my case unboxing, but unfortunately, much like in Canada, at least here in the more northern side of the states with the snow and other things going on, it is a little bit delayed, so I apologize. So instead, we are going to be covering Egman's event that he had just earlier this week and the top 16 breakdown. Now, I do want to say up front, of course, I only pull out the individual archetypes and the top performing for each one. And if you want to see all 16 lists, of course, go check out his website. But other than that, again, I want to give a huge shout out to the community. This was another 100 plus player webcam event on a Tuesday night, which I still can't get over. So love the support that UA is still getting. And of course, if you have a own community event that you're running or other webcam tournaments that you want to do, join us in the Discord. Definitely get them hyped up, and I'd be more than happy to share them on the channel and just get some more deck lists out there for everyone to kind of build off of. And the other thing to note here is that, yeah, Demon Slayer is already putting up some numbers, and this is a set that no one really expected, or at least with all the negative comments that I gotta deal with, people just weren't all that excited for it, it seemed. But spoiler, it's good. So we'll get into that shortly. But first and foremost, I do want to talk about the meta overall. Obviously, we're going to talk about the top 16 as we go through these lists, but we do have the meta breakdown there on the right-hand side. And the thing that really stuck out to me is that we saw a lot of purple bleach that was in this tournament, and 0 of them made it into top 16, which is honestly a pretty shocking number in my opinion. Now, of course, that's just like the X1 versus X2 and then some bad breakers. So I know there was one that was actually a Bakuya list at like 21st, I think it was, which was a little bit more interesting and not the Renji Rush or the typical, Ichigo Rukia package that we've seen, but it's still out there somewhere. And then otherwise, the rest of these lists I think are what a lot of people expect to see make the top 8 and top 16 list, kind of very similar to what we saw down in Orlando. But the other one that was a real shocker was Megami actually did make top 16 as well. So a little bit of Demon Slayer kind of sprinkling in, and I hope this video does a great job of getting other people to kind of check it out and at least try Yellow Demon Slayer, because I do think it is very, very strong in the current environment, and I'm very interested to see how this is going to play out with future events. And of course, we will be having, major UA announcements for regionals and things like that here in just a couple more months. So I'm really excited to see how this meta kind of continues to develop. And then, of course, One Punch Man coming out next, being a worldwide simultaneous release, is going to be very exciting. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. And of course, we got to give a huge shout out to Lawrence, taking it down with blue Nanami. And if my side-by-side comparison was correct, this was actually just two cards off from the Orlando list that won the whole thing. It had -2 Gojo for 2 of the active trigger Nobara. Obviously, the extra energy cost does mean sometimes it is going to be a little bit slower to play, but you do get the active trigger as a bonus. And, it's always good to have more active triggers in the deck overall. So, huge shout out to Lawrence being able to take down the 6-0 undefeated with blue Nanami. Obviously, I am very excited for this list in general. It is currently my favorite deck to play. And I really wish we could have seen the breakdown from Eggman's data between how many were more Nanami focused versus how many were Shrine and just pure Sukuna focused builds, or even just like the 5-1 Sukuna. I think that's where there's a little bit of overrepresentation of blue JJK just kind of getting smushed together. So I would have liked to see how those were separated, but I know a lot of people might argue that the archetypes are similar enough that they are worth carrying, that one bucket together. But then, of course, we then have to talk about, it's like, okay, well, when's the next restriction going to be for blue JJK? Or are we going to see other restrictions at all? Or by the time we get Volume 2, is Searcher Yuji going to be back and people can play the full power Sukuna deck? A lot of questions up in the air regarding that one. But if you have somehow missed the other videos or are unfamiliar with the Nanami archetype, it is a self-mill strategy, only having 2 of the Maki here, but very long story short, you want to play a bunch of draw effects or filter effects so you get down to 15 cards left in your deck to get these super powered effects. In the case of the color trigger Nanami, you just get impact, but what the real all-star, in my opinion, always is going to be the raid Nanami here, getting the 5k, the impact 1, and damage 2. Like, just late game, it is an absolute house of a card. And then it's also worth noting overall with blue JJK, you do have the raid Yuji, which continues to be an all-star in all varieties of it. Bouncing something is going to always be very, very strong. And then, of course, the Sukuna from the starter deck is really just about filtering most of the time. You know, it's nice that it gets impact very late game as a finisher, of course, but you really just want to get that extra filtering. One, for consistency. We are playing a best of one game at the end of the day, but then also just being able to get another 4K body, being able to close out the game is really, really nice as well, and builds into that Nanami strategy that I mentioned previously of going down to 15 cards left in deck. So the filtering having multiple benefits in this list in particular. But I do expect Blue JJK to continue to be a very strong player in the meta, even going into, you know, Sword Art Online, some of the other sets that we're going to get, at least for what's kind of coming up next for the North American environment. I definitely expect this deck to remain tier 1, maybe go down to tier 1.5 at the worst, depending on how One Punch Man balance-wise is going to look, right? Especially in year 2 of UA in Japan right now, we are seeing a bit of a overall power creep and set design just being a lot stronger and not having so many blank cards in the set. So we are seeing things like it was Idol Masters and the other like Idol sets that are taking a higher tier list priority, as it were, because they are just stronger decks overall. So to be seen, will One Punch Man be a tier 0 menace, right, when it launches in North America, or will it be a bit more balanced where you have generally one deck that's good, that stands out above the rest, and then the rest falling into like the more low tier 2, tier 3 type of categories? Remains to be seen, but very excited to see where that goes. Up next, we have Jonathan with the Purple Code Geass. Again, 5-1 finish here. A very strong list that we're expecting to see time and time again. And this is definitely one that I think a lot of people were expecting to see more of in the future and continue to see, just because it is a deck that has a lot of triggers depending on how you build it. So you always have the get triggers or draw triggers. And again, in a best of one setting, having those consistency pieces are just so important. But what I really always go back to and love about Purple Code Geass is that there are just so many different lines that you can take in this deck in terms of how you want to attack certain matchups, that it gives you a bit more flexibility, right, in how you are going to shape each game, right? Especially in comparison to the Nanami decks, right? A lot of it is going to boil down to, at the end of the day, you know that you have to get down to 15 cards left in deck. So your game plans are either, I have a bunch of 4K bodies which are just going to close the game out, and sometimes we're just playing them as vanillas, or you get to the late game and you say, okay, well, now I have like triple impact that you have to deal with, and I have 15 cards left in deck. So I've likely filtered through and have seen multiple final triggers, multiple special triggers, things of that nature, right? So that is something to compare to the Purple Code Geass list, which is going to have things that matter with like the C2 sequencing if you played a double AP card, which interestingly, they're only playing the 1-of copy. And then also in this list in particular, we do see a lot more of like 1s and 2-ofs kind of getting splashed in here. But at the end of the day, you are still really at the top end with the Gawain and the Gurren MK2 as being the all-stars for just, hey, this is removal that we can line up together. Obviously, Gawain, you can set up some unblockable boards if you really want to close out the game that way, which does require, you know, 2 turns to set up, but very, very strong when it happens. And then Gurren just being kind of the MVP for removal. And this goes back to what I said about Purple Bleach as well in other videos, right? Where Purple Bleach does have to require on cards from the sideline to put them to the outside area for effects, which they do have a number of to get there, so it's not too difficult. Purple Code Geass just says, hey, I have the raid fodder, I have the raid, do the big thing, right? And that's where I think we see a lot of the strength really shine through, on top of having all these extra consistency pieces. So again, shout out to Jonathan with the 5-1 with Purple Code Geass. And now I got to give the special shout out. I think Tanner was also in there. There's a couple other Kurapika players, but Lazarus with the 5-1 was the top finishing player for Green Hunter x Hunter. Playing the Melody version in a Purple Code Geass format is absolutely just, whoo, big kudos to you for pulling that off, right? You know, having that 1000 BP, and if you run to Purple Code Geass, can really hurt some of the sequencing of your turns and feel pretty bad that you have to promote it, immediately get the value out of it, and just know that it's probably going to die in the next turn. So that one can feel a little worse to play, but the active trigger is so good. And again, this is a good deck, and I don't know where people are kind of getting the notion that it's like, oh, this deck is dead, it's not good anymore, why do you rank it tier 1? You know, it's not performing, yada yada. It continues to perform. I don't know what else you want to hear from me at this point, but, you know, having the 5K body, the snipe, the impact, coming down 1 energy earlier than the Lancelot decks can actually matter a lot, and just giving you a little bit more flexibility in your energy line is pretty good, it turns out. Now, of course, when we talk about consistency factors, we do have to give a shout out to the green Suzaku that goes under the 6 Lancelot, which just draws you a card and loops it back, versus the Kurapika deck, you only have really Neon and then the Emperor time to get some extra draw that way, which again, thanks to the 2-drop Kurapika, which also is a active trigger. That card is a house, and absolutely why we're seeing this deck remain good, right? Because you have now the early removal. If you get the 2 energy version plus the removal, you're drawing a card, you're getting damage in. Like, that's everything that you're going to want out of this card. Plus, it's an active trigger. So, again, not a deck that I expect to go anywhere anytime soon. It just still remains a very strong player. I would like to see, you know, if there was one more draw effect that we had for the deck overall. But again, we have the Zepile for the filtering. You can still run the 1 double energy bouncer, which the Leorio here, if we want to bounce it and get more filtering that way. We have the 5 energy color Kurapika that has the look at top card of deck. So we do have a good number of ways to start filtering our deck and do things that we want to be doing. But at least from a just strictly 1-card combo, I know the Lancelot deck with having the Lloyd and having the color trigger just constantly getting recycled and just having the pure draw that way can help find those key pieces just a little bit sooner for how you want to sequence them. But again, for those who are maybe unfamiliar with the Green Hunter x Hunter list, again, this is all focused around Kurapika, with having that 5k body is just a great defensive wall that your opponent's going to have to deal with, and then having impact turn after turn is going to end the game very, very quickly. And of course, there are other things like the Hisoka or the 4 energy Leorio that you can also play just to give you some more attacker options. We've seen other variants that have recently done well in Japan with the starter deck gone, with giving even more impact and BP boosting effects, that you can actually build this quite a few different ways if you really want to. And again, just having the starter deck gone, being able to boost 2 energy Kurapika up to 4k, he's going to have impact because the raid gone becomes a 5k the turn that you play him. Right, there's a lot of cool options that you have from a deck building perspective that, again, this is another list that I expect is going to have quite a bit of life in future tournaments. If you haven't already, it's definitely one that's worth sleeving up and testing. It's definitely one that I keep in my bag at all times. One, because I like the deck, and it, you know, I do like Hunter x Hunter in general, but it is something that I have a strong affinity towards just because it was the first set that we got here in Union Arena, or the first month of sets we got here in Union Arena. And again, fun deck. So why not? Neon Gaming, right? And then, of course, probably the MVP of this total video, and maybe not to pick favorites too much, but we have Joshua with the Tanjiro deck. And yes, this time I am going to use the Tanjiro image instead of the Nezuko, even though that's what I've used in the previous one, because that's what's on the thumbnail, what have you. But we do see the aggressive Yellow Demon Slayer strategy come online and be able to just claw through this tournament. And then also, as some other people were talking about their tournament experience, they had unfinished decks because, again, it was a proxy tournament, or they only want to use the cards that they opened and got from pre-release weekends. That also went 4-2. So this is a deck that I very strongly, well, one, but before I get into too much detail, go check out the other 2 videos now that I've talked about this at length. But this is a deck I think more people really need to check out. One, because it's like the best yellow deck that we have in the game currently, and then just the aggro lines it pulls off is insane. But also, it's just fun. It's really cool to pull off the Nezuko and Tanjiro combo and get that multi-attack sequence going. That it is something that is unique enough that I think it's worth, you know, spending the probably $50 because you have to buy the starters, right? That's where the increased cost comes from. The $50 it's going to take like a week from now, once everyone opens up the rest of their product, to build a base ready version of this deck. It's fun. Obviously, Demon Slayer is a good anime. If you haven't watched it, what are you doing? Go watch it, right? So I think it's one to definitely keep in your back pocket. And again, I think it's going to continue to do well. If we see more Egman events in the future, or just other events that pop up, I would not be shocked in the slightest if, you know, people give it a chance. They're going to find a lot of success with this deck overall. And I think it was Josh who mentioned in particular, they just literally bricked on a 0 in their last round, or would have had game for multiple turns. So this is very easily could have been a 6-0 victory that we saw for Yellow Demon Slayer. So I really can't stress it enough to definitely check it out and try it if you are interested in a more aggressively built strategy that wants to take units from the back line, promote them to the front, get some extra attacks in, and really just make blocking a nightmare for your opponent. And then also, I got to call it out. The one thing I will call out, because I did call it out in my 2 other videos with the color trigger, Again, I know how awkward it can be to have the 4-2 color trigger in the deck. I'm very curious to see, Josh, if you watch this video, how it worked out for you, if actually playing the removal Tanjiro came up at all. But it is something that, still gets you the effect for Nezuko. It still counts as a raid fodder if you really need it. And again, just does provide a lot of value in sometimes just being able to remove something and then get a 4,500 blocker that lasts through the next turn. So really do love this list. Again, I'm expecting to see more of this in the future, and huge kudos to Joshua. To our surprise, though, there was another yellow JJK deck list that's done well. Going back to the Orlando ones where we saw Gojo make top 8. Now we have Lucas with yellow Megumi going into a top 16 finish, 4-2 record, showing us that, hey, the Shikigami can be strong and can lean into that multi-attack shenanigans. But another list where we did see Nobara kind of taking the spotlight actually from the Gojo list and being quite good, and not surprised then too much to see here Nobara being a 4 of as well. Just getting that early damage too can be very strong, it turns out, in combos well. If you want to run I think it's 2 energy Nobara in the deck as well for more ways to just get through damage and get those multi-attacks in. So where we have the Nezuko list and kind of being the upgraded version of, in spirit, what this wants to be doing, right? We do have to rely on the Chimera Shadow Garden, which is a site that does not produce a energy. Unfortunate, very important note there. And you do have to pay into it as well, but it is a way to get multi-attackers in this deck to go up to 5 or even 6 attacks, depending on if you have multiple of them in play, where the Nezuko deck just really depends on if I have the card in play and get the swap when I need it, right? So that is something to keep in mind, that you do get a little bit easier of energy manipulation, as it were, because you're always producing energy in the Demon Slayer deck, where this one you do have to be very mindful, and we do have all the double energies in the world to make sure that we have access to energy when we need it, but that is where this one can be a little bit more difficult to pull the pieces all together. Now, the thing I will note here, of course, with Megumi's raid effect, you do have the option to increase the consistency that way as well, but this is definitely where we start to see, looking at the 2 yellow decks kind of side by side, if all you care about is, hey, I want the strongest, most consistent multi-attack style of deck, what do these provide? And that's where you really start to see where Demon Slayer was just a upgrade overall from yellow JJK. That said, Volume 2, where we do get the rest of this deck in particular, does actually bump it up quite a bit. And of course, there's always the option as well to see North American exclusive cards like we have already for Union Arena. So I will be curious to see kind of what other buffs they might make in the future. But again, huge kudos here to Lucas for making it to a 4-2 finish with a deck that has not done well yet. So it's always good to see that variety kind of shining through in Union Arena, really just being, hey, play your favorite deck, get through with a 4-2 record and get rewarded for it, where I know a lot of people might have already written off the list overall. And then, of course, we have the green Lancelot deck here at the end, but another slightly different version where we have the Raid Siegfried to loop cards from your sideline back to hand, which can be really, really important for the 8 energy Lancelot, and one that, again, I mentioned this way long ago now in the Code Geass deck list breakdown that I had mentioned, but even in Japan, we saw like 3 or 4 different versions of this deck, depending on kind of what you wanted your mid-game to be and what other units that you were going to use to get up to the energy requirement of the 8 Lancelot. Like, everybody knows that 8 Lancelot is an absolute hammer that you're bringing down on the field once it comes online, right? It kills something, it's a 5k, it's a damage 2. Even if you don't rate it, it's a damage 2 5k, which is nuts, it turns out in a lot of settings. But you also then have the impact, so it is just something that puts a massive clock on your opponent. And if they don't have the special, the immediate turn to follow up as you play the Lancelot, a lot of times, unless you can just push through their defenses and kill them in 1 to 2 turns, it'll very quickly turn the flow of the game. Or heaven forbid you got a slower start. Maybe they got their Jeremiah's online early and got the double block up front, right? You can get walled out of these games kind of early, depending on which version they are playing. So again, definitely, of all lists, definitely take this one apart, figure out what pieces you like, what you don't like. We've seen them go as low as 8 zeros for a list that did well in Japan, which is crazy. And it's the one that I built just to play test. And yeah, there's some games where you just brick and have no zero. So I definitely recommend upgrading to at least 10 if you're going to play various versions of this deck. But then again, also the Siegfried or the purple raid card that I'm totally blanking out the other card is named. I've seen that make an appearance in some of the lists as well. Or maybe you just want to get extra energy through the wazoo, right? You can also play the sight card, which gives you the option to discard something and provide extra energy that way, which then does help go into the 0 energy Suzaku into the 8 Lancelot by giving you that extra energy generation you would otherwise need. That can be one of the downsides of Lancelot getting to 8 in the back line. But again, for those that are maybe unfamiliar, Lancelot is the late game hammer that comes down in the format with the 8 Lancelot, giving us the removal, giving us the big body. And then, of course, not to be missed is the 6 energy Lancelot, which becomes 5k blocker for a turn. Also threatens damage too. So oftentimes you're able to remove something of your opponents while being able to stick that 5k body for a turn, again, because they don't want to use their special too early unless they'll be able to push for like 3 or 4 points of damage. And then you get a 5k wall that your opponent just has to deal with. So very solid list overall, one that, again, I expect more people to kind of brew with and tinker with and what have you in the near future. But again, I think Demon Slayer was definitely kind of the MVP surprise, as it were, for the weekend overall. So again, here at the end, I want to give one more special shout out to the community. It's always awesome to see over 100 people come out on a Tuesday night, late night as well, and just battle it out for 6 rounds. And I know Union Arena is kind of quicker rounds, so that I'm sure that does help. But I really deeply enjoy as someone who can't often get out, because one of my locals is either Tuesday or I help out at a different local. So it never works out for me, or if I do, I just have to like skip locals and then I'll like cast it or something. But I'm really excited to see, again, people come out so often to support these. And then again, huge shout out to Egman as well for hosting these tournaments. You can check out the link to his website, which has all the deck lists down below. So with that, let me know your thoughts on the current meta. Have you had a chance to brew with the Demon Slayer decks just yet? Or are you like me and some of the Canadians who are delayed until who knows when? Again, I'll have a case opening at some time, hopefully, maybe, kind of, sort of. But we're kind of limited until the distributor gets back to us. And hey, if I have to wait so long to get my case, hopefully it has a 3-star at least. 4 cases down, no 3-star yet, but hey, maybe one day soon. But again, let me know how excited you are for Demon Slayer. And then, of course, as soon as I get stuff in, we'll have versus videos for Demon Slayer as well. We got a little bit of time before One Punch Man. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully just getting time to just play some games, it turns out. So until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.